Welcome back to our Emerge Stronger podcast. We're so excited that you guys are here with us today. I have the pleasure today of talking to Karmen Payne, who is one of our coaches, by the way. And today we're going to talk about how to coach parents, or really it's teaching parents how to coach adolescents throughout life. And there's different things that affect that. There's guilt and things like that parents can use sometimes to drive their parenting, which isn't a good idea. And Karmen's going to talk about some of those things today. So, Karmen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then tell us, enlighten us with your knowledge.
So, the reason I'm so interested in adolescence and parenting is I am a person who talked my parents into letting me leave home when I was 16 years old.
Okay.
And I am convinced that it's the parent's role as coach to assist their child through that journey and transition into adulthood. And if we are successful at that, I think we see longer term results come out much better than if we let guilt or shame or regret or even manipulation drive our parenting. And in a culture where social media is so influential with kids, it's very easy to fall for that. Kids get in their head what they want and what they feel like they need, whether that's a boyfriend or a certain role in extracurricular activities. And a whole family may be caught up in following travel ball every weekend and have no time to connect and build and grow as a family. And so I really like to help parents learn how to draw good boundaries and hold those boundaries to help their teens transition into adulthood successfully.
Okay. So tell me, let's start out by you telling me, how did you arrive at 16 years old to say, hey, I want to get out? What was going on in your family at the time that made you want to do that? And why do you think your parents let you do it?
So, my mother was an ardent Christian, and my father was a Vietnam vet who drank a lot to cope with his own pain. And I think that because of those issues, I found myself wanting to be the center of someone's attention. And so I found someone who was more broken than me, and I set my mind toward it. And honestly, to answer your second question, my will was stronger than theirs.
Okay.
I think they were afraid I would get pregnant, which in the 80s was a terrible, shameful thing. And they were afraid that I would outmaneuver them to get my way. So they signed the papers and gave in. And that led me down a long road. I became a nurse. I made some good choices. I made some bad choices, ultimately leading me to a divorce. I completed my doctorate in 2022. I have a master's in human services counseling relative to sexual addictions. And I have a lot of experience in life that I bring to the table. And one of the things that's always stuck in my mind, Dr. Dobson, when I was a young mother, said, you cannot parent children by emotion. And that stuck in my head. And so I began to practice that when my kids would say, I hate you, or, I don't want to live with you anymore. When me and their dad divorced, they would threaten to leave and go live with their dad. There's a lot of temptation there to just cave in to your children. And I relied on that piece of advice from a man I never met on the radio to guide me through being a tough single mom. And so I have 3 adult children. My oldest is an accountant, and she has a son. And then I have a daughter who's a minister, and she has 3 sons and a daughter. And I have my third child is my son, and he has a little boy and a little boy that's almost here. And he's a parole officer and a firefighter. So they all turned out relatively well. We've had spots that they went through, but everybody's successful and everybody's moving forward with their life. And I think in part due to that advice Dr. Dobson gave me, it's obviously the grace of God. It's
Right.
obviously miracles we've seen along the way, but also I never let them negotiate, or as I tell them, I don't negotiate with terrorists, because I knew that the adults around me gave in to me, to my will, and I would not do that with them.
So overall, do you think that there were more negative effects by you being able to emancipate from your family?
I think that I was very fortunate. The As it turned out, I had people God planted in my path along the way to coach me. I had my daughters within 14 months of each other, and my obstetrician said, "Do not come back in this office expecting another baby in 6 months. Don't do it. You're intelligent. You can succeed at something. Go out and find what you were made for and do it." And he made me believe in myself. That those simple words resonated with me. I can do something besides produce babies. And it's not that it's wrong to have babies. It's just that I didn't see my worth or my value. And when we speak life and speak vision into young people, we may do more than we realize with our words and our support of them, because many times you're looking at a gifted, intelligent person that has a lot to offer, and they just don't know it. But you can see their value and the things they have to offer society where they cannot see it at all.
Right. So why don't you tell us, what are some of the emotions that parents parent from? So what are some of the things that they would be dealing with that would make them go down the wrong road?
So I'm going to kind of take us through 3 or 4 points. The first one being, do not parent from what you didn't get. You cannot live vicariously through your child. If you were Miss Popularity and your child is a person who loves music and mathematics, accept that. Your child can be different than you and still be very content and joyful in their life. Your job as a parent is to act as a guide to help them discover their path, not to force a path you've chosen for them.
Right.
It's funny to me. I will give you an example of that. When Nicholas was 18 and decided he wanted to be a police officer, I begged him not to. And I even made a deal with him. I said, if you will go to fire school first, then we'll talk about it. Well, I should have learned from earlier in his life that when I say that and he doesn't respond, he's not agreeing to my deal. He's just letting me talk, and he's going to do what he wants. So he went to fire school and he became a firefighter. And as soon as he turned 21, he went to police academy. He was following his path. He had a call on his life that I wasn't comfortable with. But I've seen over the 5 years he practiced law enforcement before he went into paroles, God used him in situations over and over again. And so you can't say to your child, well, this is what I always did, so it's what you should do. Don't do that. And don't come at it, well, I never had anybody to take me to the nail shop and take me to get makeup and a formal, and so you should enjoy this. Well, not if they would prefer to be in home ec. So be the guide that walks alongside them on their path, not your path. Second of all, you cannot and should not parent out of guilt. If you've made mistakes in the past, all parents do, but if you've made engagement with DHR or Child Protective Services and you've gotten your children back, don't be that parent that says, well, I let them down, so now I have to make up for it. No, you don't. You can't make up for it. You can accept responsibility for what you did, and you can acknowledge the principles that the family has now agreed to live by, and you hold them accountable to those principles. And
Mhm.
when they scream at you, well, you were this, this, and this, you simply say, yes, I was. And when you're ready to talk to me in a respectful tone, we can have a conversation, but I'm not changing my mind based on words you put
Mhm.
with me.
Yeah.
And I've,
I
I've,
know for me personally, you know, my I was married for 5 years before I met David. So it was years ago. I was young and all that. And I remember from time to time feeling guilty because I was divorced and they because their dad did not continue a relationship with them, which
Mhm,
happens more times than you think. Fathers do
mhm.
not stay in children's lives after divorce. And I remember from time to time, feeling guilty. So I would overcompensate in other areas until I got a little older. When I hit my 30s, I was like, okay, yeah, this is not going to serve me well,
Yeah.
And I think that the wisdom of that came from pursuing God, and what does the word say about parenting and all of that. And so I totally resonate with that. The divorce didn't have anything to do with the kids, but I do believe that it was a healthy thing that I did
Mhm.
to protect them, but because there was a lot of other things going on, but I felt tremendous guilt about that too.
Well, and you will find what happens is they're like, well, he doesn't have a dad, so. And
Hmm.
I'll be frank, Nicholas probably got the worst end of that deal
Hmm.
because when he became a teenager, I would say the pipe's leaking, you have to fix it. And he would say, I'm 17, I don't know how to fix it. And I said,
Hmm.
Google it, call somebody's dad, find
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
Because I wanted him to be prepared to be a man.
Hmm.
And his wife and his two sons reap the benefits of me being that kind of person. I'm not saying I was right, but being that kind of person helped him become innovative. On the flip side of the coin, a lot of times people become a circus parent. Well, they've suffered this loss. So everything's got to be fun and everything's got to be, Facebook perfect. And the fact is, that's not life. And you rob your kids of resiliency when you do that.
Hmm.
So when they face difficulties as they get older, guess who they're going to put it on
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
figure out? And that's unfair. And that kind of leads us to the third thing. You cannot and should not parent from a place of shame or failure.
Hmm.
I can't give them all the clothes they want in Lululemon,
Hmm.
so I'm not good enough. That's not true. The world is complicated and difficult and expensive,
Hmm.
and you need to teach your children from principle from a very early age something to live by. So
Right.
for us as believers, I've always kind of tried to stress to mind like the 80-10-10 rule or 70-10-10-10, where
Hmm.
they live off 80% of their money, give 10%, save 10%. Um, or you may want them to get a job at a certain point and put in half on their car.
Hmm.
Don't feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses
Hmm.
in your neighborhood. And if somebody's daughter has the 16th glamorous birthday party,
Hmm.
you have to have one too.
Hmm.
That is not appropriate for your family if it's not in your budget.
Hmm.
So I have some friends that don't do birthday presents or Christmas presents.
Hmm.
They do family experiences and the
Hmm.
family talks about it and the family chooses, like one year they went to Legoland. One year they went to Disney. They may go to the Grand Canyon, but they create memories and time together. And that leads me to my fourth point. The goal of your family is to connect and to be a support system and a place that people have common goals and interests and they can build each other up.
Hmm.
It is not your job to facilitate everything they want.
Hmm.
When I was at the end of my professional nursing career, I still do nursing, but I do it more in missionary work.
Hmm.
Um, the Lord had called me to go to graduate school. And I said, I can't. I have one more child in college. And the Lord said, really? And that's when Nicholas came home and said, I'm going to fire school.
Hmm.
And God has a way of handling things.
Hmm.
when you think it's yours, we only rent these children. They were never ours to start with. We couldn't breathe life into them.
Right.
And we can't make them. There are a lot of people that walk around that want children and can't have them and have all the equipment to make it work. But he has a calling and a purpose for each child. And you can't be like their superhero and come in and save the day. Sometimes you have to walk beside them and let them hurt. One of the worst times for me was my second child, my daughter's senior year, when she had a perfect GPA. She had everything going for her that she should have been chosen as captain of the cheerleading squad. But because of the person that had the right to choose that personal bend towards somebody, that didn't happen for her. And she was heart sick for not just that one football season, but for that whole year. But later on, that has paid off for her in a ministerial role, because she can sit back in a room and speak into people's character in a way that a lot of people cannot, because she's had to humble herself before. So don't look at every pain your child suffers and try to alleviate. We live in a society that here's a pill for this, or a rub for that, or numb this. We don't need to numb every pain. Some pain's for our benefit. The Bible says that the Lord disciplines a son that he loves, just like a man disciplines a son that he loves. And sometimes the Lord's discipline is painful and difficult to watch as a parent, but you have to, I'm sorry to use this word, but you have to butt out. And a lot of times for moms, especially single moms, that's super hard.
Right.
Because we see ourselves as having to be two parents, and I've got to make everything right. And I remember when Nicholas was 5, he's 20, he'll be 28 this year, watching him run laps at his first football practice. He was 5 years old, about to turn 6 in 2 months. And I wanted to run out there and save him. I mean, he was soaking wet all the way down to his skin under pads and all that. And I was like, my baby needs water. But my brother had told me that I did not need to intervene. I needed to let him grow up and be a boy. And boys, you don't run out on the football field and try to save them. And so I stood there gripping that fence. And when it was over, Nicholas said, Mom, could you please not stand on the fence with all the dad? I was so defeated.
Yeah.
And I could have said, well, you made me feel so-and-so. But I remembered Dr. Dobson's words, and I said, I will not do that to you again. Because I wanted the affirmation of, you did a good job. You're a good mom standing there on the fence. And he was like, don't stand with the dads. That's not cool. But you can't give in to that emotion and say, poor, pitiful me.
Right.
And that's a tendency that we have as mothers, like Jesus's mother, when he said, it's not my time yet. And she just looked at him and walked off.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to work our kids' emotions. And you need to be very careful about that, because when you do that, you become their God. And it's very hard to be their God 24/7. You'll want to quit that job.
Right.
And when you do, there's nowhere to turn in a resignation, because you created that.
Yeah. So I think back to a couple of things, a couple of stories in my own life. I remember when my son, I think he was probably 16-ish, he comes to me and he says, Mom, I want to go into the Army. And at that particular time, I was going through a very difficult time in my own life. And I was just really, what I wanted to do is just all my little chickadees underneath my wings, right? I did not want to lose any of them, And I was just like, baby, please don't do this to me. Please don't put me through this and all that. I really did in that very moment make it about me and not about what God had planned for his life. He did, like your son, went ahead and did what he wanted to do. And I'm grateful for him going into the military because that experience did teach him, like, his confidence. Like, he's very confident in himself now. And not that he didn't have any confidence before, he did have some, but it was definitely lacking because he didn't have that father figure
Yeah.
to speak into his life. So, sometimes parents think they know, but God, like you said, has another plan. And then the other thing that you were talking about with, not saving your children from pain, that resonates so much with me because recently my son, unfortunately, has gone through a divorce. And I was concerned about, because when pain happens, you either go the wrong way or you go the right way,
Yeah.
and, I remember praying and saying, God, I want to help resolve this for him. And God was just like, just trust me. See,
Mhm.
and God reminded me of the scripture, when you train a child in the way that he should go, when he's old, he won't depart from it. And, I do believe, like, we were part of church. He was part of, like, God was a part of our everyday lives. The very thing that I told my kids their whole lives is, if you don't get anything else from me, get this: pursue God. That's what you do, And so what you're saying, like, really resonates with me as a parent, because I was a single parent for 10 years. I knew what it was. It was a long time that I was single, and it was hard. And I did try to parent from guilt. I did sometimes make that about me and not about them, but when you course correct, I'm telling you, like, it helps the kids, and that those pains, sometimes even what they don't have is good, because, like, when you think about a child that has everything given to them, and they're rich in things, right? Materialistic
Yeah.
things, and they get all the bells and whistles. What I feel like in some ways, and I know, we, just like our Father wants to give us good gifts, we want to give our children good gifts. It's something that's ingrained in us, but wisdom has to accompany that, because if you give them everything they want, what you're doing is sacrificing the long term for the short term,
Yeah.
right? You're not teaching them to go out and fish for themselves, so you can either give them fish or you can teach them how to fish, right? And so
Yeah.
you're sacrificing the long term for the short term. But when I was a single mom, we didn't, like, there were times when we ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. There were
Mhm.
times, like, I remember not having cable for 3 years, which is obviously a first world problem. But we
Yeah.
watched the DVD of The Lion King until it was stripped, right? So, we did not have everything that I felt like the kids needed. But
Right.
what did that do in them? That produced a work ethic, right? That
Right.
produced the mindset of saving money. And I still have two younger kids. One's 19 and about to go into the military, which I think is going to be great. But the older two they save money. They're smart. I don't know that they would have learned that lesson had
Right.
they not experienced what we experienced when they were younger. And
Yeah.
so, all those things that you're speaking to me or speaking to us, I feel like really resonate in my heart. I'm like, yeah, that is definitely so, so true. So why don't you tell us now, if a parent has found themselves parenting from those four areas that you just talked about, what can they do right now to course correct? How can they raise up their kids to be successful people like what we
Well,
have?
here's the part of the story I haven't told you yet.
Okay.
I went crazy when I was about 35 years old. I fell
Mhm.
in love with a man of poor character,
Mhm.
and I followed him right to the gates of hell.
Okay.
And so at 40, I found myself having to make a major course correction.
Mhm.
And that included moral choices that I'd lived in front of them, moral
Mhm.
choices I had allowed them to live.
Mhm.
And when I repented, when I course corrected to my faith, then I had to live it out in my life. And
Mhm.
I couldn't go to my kids and say, well, I've repented. I'm back in love with Jesus. You got to straighten up.
Mhm.
Because two of them were college age. And
Yeah.
that presented some difficulties. And then I had a 15-year-old. And so I really spent some time seeking God's wisdom. And I had conversations with them and said, listen, this is what I won't allow in my home anymore.
Mhm.
You know the truth and you know what I've done. And I tried to have this deep, like tell all situation. And my oldest daughter said, Excuse me, can I interrupt you? I
Mhm.
said, yes. She said, we were there. We don't need the play by play.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you'll just tell us what your plan is for the future, that will be quite enough. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to move and we're going to start over.
Mhm.
And it took some time to walk away from everything. It wasn't an all at once thing,
Mhm.
but over the course of time, if you're course correcting, take responsibility for what you
Mhm.
did that you should
Mhm.
not have done and say, I'm sorry. And don't say, I'm sorry for you. Say, I'm sorry to them
Mhm.
because they are the ones that you did wrong. If you yelled and screamed and cussed, say, I'm sorry, I've been verbally abusive to you.
Mhm.
And I'm going to do my best to break that habit.
Mhm.
Don't say, well, I know I haven't been a good mother,
Mhm.
because that immediately sets the tone for this is about me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then when they start to be maybe use those same words back that you've used against them, say, I'm so sorry. I've taken responsibility for that already, and you're not going to do this in my home.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're going to have to stop right where we're at and come back to this when you've got a cooler head. Write down some goals. Don't say the principle, like in my house, education, kindness, and us sticking together were our three main principles. Outside our faith, we have a common faith in God. We have a common goal that everybody gets a good education of some sort. We have a common goal that we're going to be kind to each other and we're going to stick together.
Mhm.
And anything that violates those values, if you're going to go out and your curfew is 11 and you're going to be out past 11, then the courtesy of kindness says you have to call.
Mhm.
And if you violate that principle, then we need to sit down and have a conversation the next time you think you're going to go out,
Mhm.
because you may not be.
Right.
Consequences, sometimes they're natural. One time, my daughter had some friends riding in her car, and a car similar to hers the police had been given an all points bulletin to look for it.
Mhm.
So when they pulled her over, the boys had some beer in their coat, in their inside pocket of their jacket. And so she got an open container violation ticket. I didn't go to court. I didn't go pick her up. Those kinds of things, when you have to engage consequences, you need to be accountable for them if you're old
Mhm.
enough to make those choices. Now,
Yes.
eventually, of course, I came around, but I did not immediately do what she wanted me to do. I let her
Mhm.
cook in it for a minute, because going and paying the ticket for your child is enabling your child to get more tickets.
Right.
They
Mhm.
need a job at Pizza Hut if they're going to be able to be old enough to get tickets. They need to
Mhm.
pay for tickets.
Mhm.
They need to pay the increase in the insurance. Um, you should have consequences relative to behavior in your home so that they don't get out in the world and go, what? I have to do what people tell me? As an employer, I can tell if people have taught their children about the world as they grew up. I used to be a director of nursing, and I would hire young nurses or nurse assistants who would say, I don't want to come to work on the weekend. I'm so sorry, love. That's not the way this works.
Mhm.
But they had never had to make decisions. Back to your point of, sometimes the hard times are good lessons for your children, and course correction requires you to let them be accountable
Mhm.
for their part and you be accountable for yours, and work
Mhm.
together as a team to set a new direction.
Mhm.
If there's been drugs or alcohol or a loss of a job, you may have to work together to solve problems that
Mhm.
were your problem before, where now it's a we thing. We might have to eat Little Caesars pizza instead of ordering from the local pizzeria that costs three times as much.
Right.
You might have to get a gown from a consignment shop for the prom instead of buying a new off the rack.
Right.
And those discussions are good things. When you start to feel guilt, you need to go back to your principles and say, am I violating our family's principles? No, then this guilt's a lie.
Mm. Mhm.
If it's not violating the values of your family, then the enemy's trying to manipulate you with your emotions because, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy it's funny to me because if you go to 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, Paul has it written out for us
Mhm.
that we're to take every thought captive,
Mm.
we're to compare it to the word and see if it's true. And if not, we're to use it as a weapon to tear down the lies of Satan and the strongholds that he's using to control us. So if we know that guilt is a lie, we're not violating our values or principles. And we know the truth of God is that the Lord said we would have trouble, but he's with us and we'll get through it. We don't want to raise wimpy children.
Mhm.
So we stand up and we tell the truth. Well,
Mhm.
everybody else is wearing X, Y, and Z. No, they're not.
Mhm.
Who are you actually talking about that's wearing that?
Mhm.
And understand they might not be in our situation now, but someday they'll have their own situation.
Mhm.
And my job is to raise you, not your whole entire freshman
Right.
class.
Right.
And stick to your guns. My friend Rachel Gunn, she has a phrase that she uses, and it's called holding the boundary. When they push back against it, and it's a good boundary, and it's a healthy boundary, course correction holds the line.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's so good. So what you're describing is what some people would say tough love. But I'm in full agreement with you that sometimes being a parent is tough, and if you love your children, you will discipline them. You will set boundaries for them because boundaries are for protection. They're
Right.
not for control. Now, the person that has the boundary being set on them may feel controlled, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it could be because maybe there's something not right in their heart, right? Because
Right.
even Jesus puts boundaries like don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, all of those things. Those are boundaries, and they're not to be mean. They're to protect us from whatever that consequence is for that violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some people would call that tough love, but I think there's a time to be soft and compassionate in some areas, but then there's other times where, like you said, like if you get a ticket for an open container, I'm not going to save you from it. You're going to get a job. You're going to go to court. You're going to do those things because
Mm-hmm.
those are lessons they'll never forget.
Right. Don't let people
You'll
in your car that are drinking.
Yeah, you'll never forget because hey, their decision also affected me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I love that. So let me ask you this. What would you say to the 16-year-old Karmen? Like if you could go back and you were in that place where you wanted to emancipate from your family, what would you say to that person that could maybe help her reconsider doing that?
I'm not doing this because I'm against you. I'm not going to sign those papers.
Mhm.
I am going to hold you accountable, but I'm doing it because I care for you, not because I'm against you. When
Mhm.
you are old enough to sign the papers yourself, you may do as you please.
Mhm.
But I told my own daughters, if you go to college and graduate college first, I will pay for your wedding. And if you try to get married when you're a teenager, I will not permit it,
Mhm.
no matter what you do.
Mhm.
So please don't try that move because
Mhm.
that will not work
Right.
for me. And I did not know. This is a funny story. My daughter used that against me because she graduated in May and wanted her wedding in August.
Mhm.
So I finished paying for college and turned around and paid for a wedding
Mhm.
immediately. But she kept her end of the deal, so I had no
Mhm.
choice.
Yeah.
But it to your point of tough love, let me kind of wrap that up for you. My oldest daughter got into some issues when her marriage ended, and she was in another state. They were military, and when things went awry, she had not talked to me for quite some time, 2 years actually. And she reached out, and her sister-in-law went and picked her son up and spent the night and picked her up the next morning from jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her, did you ever think for a second that we wouldn't come after you hadn't talked to us for that long? And she said, no, ma'am, not for an instant. I knew you would be on the way. Love is gracious, but remember that the prodigal son's father stood at the driveway and looked for him every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't move until he saw him coming toward him.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And when you see them repent, when you see their heart turn toward you, you know the rebellion is over.
Right.
And that's what I would tell the 16-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to stand here and let you throw the mean words and have the hissy fit and make the threats. I'm willing to stand here and wait and not be moved by your emotions until you're willing to turn and repent.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you don't want is to enable a 16-year-old to start making decisions they're not mentally prepared to make.
Right. Right.
We know now that the brain is not mature until you're 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
When I pursued my doctoral studies, I had several grandsons, and my daughter fostered, and I had these kids around me all the time, and I'm trying to write and I'm trying to study, and I'm watching and I'm realizing why God had me wait until I was near 50 years old to go through this process of dissertation, because I would have lost my mind in my 30s. But a lot of times when you're 16, you can't see the wisdom in God having you wait.
Mm-hmm.
And the adults around you have to have the strength to stand there and wait till you turn toward the repentance and the wisdom to wait. And often, if you can get through that period of time, you won't face that giant again.
Right.
You just have to be willing to stand there and take it and not take offense. I would tell parents, choosing that verse of scripture where Jesus says, there is no chance that offense won't come, but don't take offense.
Mm-hmm.
And what that basically means is somebody's going to try to offend you. Don't take it to heart.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to say ugly things. They're going to slam their door and say, I hate you. They're going to say things they shouldn't say. If that's all it takes to upset you, you need to grow up some.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how to say it any other way.
Right.
Because it's like I tell my grandson when he says, I'm not eating that. And I said, well, you don't have to, but it'll be here in the morning for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, what? Until that's gone, that is what you're going to eat.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that now and have dessert, or you can have it tomorrow, whatever you want to do. But you have to choose those battles.
Right.
And that might be over a 16-year-old wanting to go to a concert that you're not okay with, or wearing clothes that show more than you want. I don't know. Different people have different battles.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to know where the line is and choose your battles wisely, and be willing to take what they throw at you.
Right. Right. So much of what you're saying is really my husband's idea of parenting. Like he is very tender towards our youngest. It's a girl, and all that. But when it comes to the boundaries and, hey, this is how it's going to be, he is really good at holding the line. Like he's really good at that. And, it makes me very proud of him. And it actually brings relief for me, because it's like, I know that, hey, we might be unpopular right now with her, and I'm okay with that. If that saves her life down the line, I'm completely okay. You either sacrifice the long term for the short term, or the short term for the long term. I mean, those are the only options. So yeah, what you're saying really resonates.
To cap that off, I told my children growing up, I didn't waste no's. So like I actually didn't say no as much as you might think. But if I said no, it was not going to be negotiated. Mainly because I told them, if I tell you no, there's a check in my spirit. And if that check is in my spirit, there is no way we're going back on it, because I'm not going to be the mom that says, God told me to not let them go, and now there's been a car wreck and I wish I'd stuck with my guns. If my gut instinct was a no, it was a no. And that served them to trust me. So that now, over 25, moms hang in there. Once they get over 25, they think you're much smarter.
Oh, they do. For sure.
They will call me and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Because they know that I'm going to seek the Holy Spirit. I'm not just going to throw answers at them so I can be the yes or no man. I don't want to control your life. I want to be a guide to you and a support to you. And the job of parenting an adolescent is to work your way out of a job. If you do it well and you do it consistently, you will do it less frequently as they age. And by the time you're, 25, 30 years old, you're their friend. And they can count on you for advice or a coffee conversation, but you're not having to dig them out of a hole every time you turn around once. If you start enabling kids at 12, 13 years old, you're going to be doing it till they're 45. So that is kind of my approach to coaching parents and kids. I always want to support the parent and the family's goals, but I also want to hear that child's dreams and goals and what they want to do and become. And that kind of helps the child have balance as an adolescent for reaching forward and being okay with limits right now.
Right. So good. Okay. So we have time for one last piece of advice. Whatever you think it is, shoot it to us. What would you give us?
Listen more than you talk. Get to their heart and be flexible. Be flexible in the places that don't matter. Hairstyles, jewelry, things that are not going to influence them in the long run, that are phases. One time my daughter in college colored her hair with Kool-Aid. Why? I don't know. But those things came and went. However, those things that are character or life shaping, you got to know the difference and help them choose their friends wisely. Because those friends have long-term influence and impact. Even if the friend comes and goes, it may leave a lasting scar on your child's heart. So that would be my advice. I want to hear their heart, hear their dreams, hear what they want to become and the path they want to go to reach them. I nearly blew it with Nicholas because I did not want him to be a cop in this day and age. But I was wrong. And I had to go back and tell him I was wrong.
Right.
Don't be afraid of that.
Yeah. So if you need help with coaching, like if you're a parent and you have an adolescent and you need help with coaching your child or bringing them back around or making them good, healthy adults, I'm going to tell you to reach out to Karmen at itsnotover.net. She can, you can book coaching sessions with her and she'd be happy to help you. Or if you're an adolescent that feels like, hey, I need maybe I don't trust my parents at this point in time, but I don't want to make a bunch of mistakes. I need some parental guidance. And so I would say reach out and Karmen can help you with that. Karmen has a list of things that she can help people with, even outside of parenting. There's so many things. She has so many certifications and all the great things. So, and a lot of wisdom too. So I'm so glad that you got to come today. Reach out to Karmen. Itsnotover.net and get scheduled. Thank you, Karmen. I appreciate your time today. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Emerge Stronger podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you would like to connect with one of our coaches, please visit our website at itsnotover.net. We would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast so you get updates on our latest episodes, and we would absolutely love a review. Please share this episode with your family and friends. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.